On April 8, 1942, the desert air near Iran carried the smell of dust, fuel, and tired men moving east with no clear home to return to. The Polish the Second Corps had been marching for weeks, survivors of prisons, deportations, and shattered borders. Their uniforms were worn thin, their boots cracked, their eyes older than their years. That morning, as the convoy slowed near a small village, a boy stepped forward holding something unexpected in his arms. A bear cub, small, frightened, and silent. The cub's mother had been killed by hunters. The boy needed food. The soldiers needed something they didn't know they had lost. A deal was made. A few coins. A tin of meat. And suddenly the cub was passed into military hands, wrapped in a coat that still smelled of oil and smoke. Someone laughed. Someone else said nothing. The bear licked condensed milk from a bottle and fell asleep against the soldier's chest. They named him Happy Warrior. At first, he was just warmth in a cold world. He rode in trucks, slept in tents, and followed footsteps like a shadow. As bombs fell elsewhere and maps changed overnight, Wojtek grew. His paws became heavy, his breath became loud, his presence became normal. Men who had lost families taught him habits without realizing it. He copied what he saw. He stood upright. He wrestled for fun. He reached for bottles and learned that laughter followed. War pressed on. The unit moved through Iraq, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. Each border erased another certainty. Wojtek crossed them all without knowing their names. He learned routines instead. Morning noise, evening silence, the tension before movement, the relief after survival. He sensed fear without understanding it. He sensed loyalty without needing words. By the time the Corps prepared to sail toward Italy, Wojtek was no longer hidden. Regulations mattered. Animals did not belong on transports. So the men did what soldiers do when rules collide with reality. They enlisted him rank, serial number, rations, paybook, private. Wojtek officially joined the Polish II Corps. As the ship pulled away, engines shaking steel decks, the bear stood among men, staring at an uncertain horizon, unaware that history had already taken note of his presence. Wojtek's story cannot be separated from the men who carried him forward. The Polish II Corps was formed from survivors of extraordinary displacement. Many had been imprisoned in the Soviet Union after Poland's invasion in 1939, then released years later into exile. They were soldiers without a country, fighting under Allied command, bound together by shared loss rather than ideology. Their journey through the Middle East was not just logistical. It was emotional survival. Within this fragile community, Wojtek became something steady. He did not ask where they were going. He did not question orders. He responded only to presence. When soldiers argued, he watched. When they rested, he rested. When they played, he joined. Wrestling became his favorite language. Grown men tested their strength against a bear and laughed when they lost. In a war built on domination, these moments mattered. Wojtek mimicked habits constantly. He learned to carry objects in his paws. He learned to drink from bottles. Beer, when offered, amused him. Cigarettes fascinated him. He did not smoke as a human would, but he chewed them, copying gestures more than understanding purpose. These details were not jokes to the men. They were reminders that life still had room for the absurd. As Wojtek grew, so did responsibility. He could no longer be treated as a pet. He was strong enough to harm someone unintentionally, but he never did. Witnesses consistently described his gentleness toward those he recognized as part of his group. Outsiders received curiosity. His people received restraint. The Corps adopted an unofficial rule: Wojtek was never to be used as a weapon. He was not trained to attack. He was not encouraged toward aggression. His value was presence, not force. In this way, he reflected the contradiction of the soldiers themselves trained for violence, yet desperate to preserve fragments of humanity. When the Corps was assigned to the Italian campaign, The weight of the war became unavoidable. Monte Cassino was no rumor. It was a fortified reality. Casualties were expected. Fear returned openly. Wojtek sensed the change. He became restless. He followed supply lines. He watched men strain under heavy crates of ammunition, moving uphill under fire. This watching mattered. Animals learned through repetition and reward, but Wojtek learned something else. Pattern. He recognized effort. He recognized urgency. He recognized belonging. No one ordered him. No one trained him. He stepped forward because everyone else did. His presence forced a quiet question among the soldiers. What did it mean that a bear, with no stake in victory or defeat, chose to help? The answer was uncomfortable. Loyalty did not require understanding politics. It required attachment. Wojtek was not brave in the human sense. He did not calculate risk. He responded to community, and in a war that constantly stripped people of identity, that response became extraordinary. As preparations for battle intensified, the bear stood among ammunition stacks, waiting, unaware that his next actions would redefine how the Unit 10 history remembered him. The transformation did not happen in a single moment. It unfolded under pressure, shaped by exhaustion, danger, and repetition. Monte Cassino was not one battle, but a series of brutal attempts, each ending in failure and loss. The terrain favored defenders. The air smelled of smoke and shattered stone. Every movement uphill demanded strength and speed. Ammunition became lifelines, measured in minutes. Wojtek watched these lifelines move. At first, he paced beside soldiers carrying wooden crates stamped with warnings he could not read. The crates were heavy. Men leaned forward under their weight, breathing hard, slipping on loose ground. When a crate was dropped, frustration followed. Chimney mattered, exposure mattered. Wojtek reacted the way he always had, by copying. He reached for a box. The weight surprised him, but did not stop him. He lifted it upright, pressed it against his chest, and walked forward on two legs. Soldiers froze. Someone shouted his name. Someone else laughed in disbelief. Then the laughter stopped, replaced by urgency. Wojtek did not run. He did not panic. He moved steadily, following the same path the others used, delivering the crate intact. He returned for another. There was no applause. There was no command. There was only continuation. In war, usefulness is respected immediately. Wojtek became part of the supply chain without ceremony. He carried ammunition repeatedly, ignoring explosions, reacting only when sounds came too close. When shells landed nearby, he paused, then continued. The men adjusted around him. They cleared paths. They handed him crates. They stopped worrying about protecting him and focused on keeping up. Fear did not vanish, but it shifted. If the bear could move forward, so could they. This moment marked Wojtek's transformation from companion to contributor. He was no longer just along for the journey. He altered outcomes in small but meaningful ways. Faster ammunition delivery meant sustained fire. Sustained fire meant pressure. Pressure meant survival. Later, when the battle ended and the hill fell, stories spread quickly. A bear carrying artillery shells sounded like exaggeration, but exaggeration could not explain the photographs. The unit adopted a new emblem. A bear holding a shell, not as propaganda, but as recognition. Wojtek did not change after Monte Cassino. He remained playful. He wrestled. He stole food when unattended. He slept heavily. But the way men looked at him changed. He was no longer symbolic comfort. He was shared memory. War continued north. The corps advanced through Italy. Loss followed them. Victory did not erase grief. Wojtek aged quickly in body, but slowly in awareness. He followed routines until routines disappeared. When the war ended, another transition began. Soldiers were demobilized. Borders were redrawn again. Many could not return home. Wojtek, now fully grown, no longer fit into tents or trucks. Easier decisions were made for him, as they had always been. He was sent to Edinburgh Zoo, The cage was safe, food was regular, care was consistent, but something essential was missing. Former soldiers visited when they could. They spoke Polish. Wojtek responded immediately. He stood. He recognized sound before sight. For him, language was not instruction. It was memory. Wojtek died in 1963. He did not leave behind tactics or theories. He left behind a reminder that even within organized destruction, unplanned acts of solidarity can emerge. His story survives not because he was a bear in uniform, but because he reflected the soldiers who adopted him as resilient and searching for something to belong to. By early May 1944, Monte Cassino was no longer a distant objective. It was a living wound. The ruins of the monastery sat above the valley like a broken crown, surrounded by artillery scars and unburied memories. Every advance toward it had been paid for in blood. The Second Corps prepared for another assault, fully aware of what failure meant. Ammunition shortages had already decided battles before shots were fired. Supply lines became the quiet battlefield. Crates had to move uphill under observation. Trucks could not reach forward positions. Men carried shells by hand, slipping on rubble, breathing dust, counting steps instead of seconds. Every delay gave defenders time. Every dropped crate became a risk. The margin for error was thin enough to disappear entirely. It was during one of these tense preparations that the impossible idea took shape not as a plan, but as recognition. Wojtek had already been moving alongside the supply teams. No one told him to stop. No one told him to help. He had been watching for weeks. He understood the rhythm: lift, walk, deliver, return. The men noticed something unsettling. The bear was calmer under fire than many of them. At first, hesitation dominated. A bear was still a bear. He could panic, he could run, he could draw attention, but war does not wait for certainty. When the first crate slipped from exhausted hands and cracked against stone, Wojtek stepped forward again. He wrapped his forelegs around the box, pulled it against his chest, and stood upright. No cheers followed. There was no time. A soldier instinctively guided him forward. Another cleared debris. Someone shouted directions that Wojtek did not understand, yet followed anyway. His steps were heavy but deliberate. Shrapnel whistled overhead. Dust burst nearby. He flinched once, then continued. The impossible idea became reality through repetition. He carried one crate, then another. The men adjusted, not questioning how or why. In that moment, Wojtek was not extraordinary, he was useful. And usefulness in war overrides disbelief faster than any speech. Word spread quickly through the unit, not as legend, but as instruction. The bear can carry it. No rank attached to the sentence. No emotion, just fact. Ammunition moved faster. Men conserved strength. Lines held longer. Small advantages stacked quietly, invisibly altering outcomes. There was still fear. Every explosion reminded them that none of this was safe. Wojtek was not protected by armor or instinctive caution, yet he stayed. Not because he understood the battle, but because he understood presence. His people were here, so he was here. By the time the assault began in full, Wojtek was no longer questioned. He was expected. An expectation in war is heavier than any crate. The assault unfolded before dawn, when the world felt unfinished and fragile. Artillery thundered through the valley, shaking the ground in uneven pulses. Smoke rolled upward, erasing outlines and distances. Men moved forward in sections, voices swallowed by noise. Wojtek followed the supply path without hesitation, repeating the same motion he had practiced without knowing it. Lift, hold, walk. Each trip exposed him to danger he could not name. Explosions sent vibrations through his body. He reacted not with panic, but with pauses, brief moments of confusion before continuing forward. Soldiers noticed something unexpected. When wounded men were carried past him, Wojtek slowed. When shouting increased, he stopped. He was reading emotion, not tactics. At each one point, a shell landed close enough to throw debris across the path. Wojtek dropped his crate and stepped back. A soldier reached for him instinctively, touching his shoulder. Speaking words meant more for reassurance than instruction. Wojtek leaned forward again, picked up the crate, and continued. That moment passed without ceremony, but it was remembered. Hours blurred, crates moved, ammunition fed guns, fire answered fire. Wojtek completed trip after trip, his breathing heavy, his fur matted with dust and sweat. He did not understand victory or defeat. He understood continuity. As long as the movement continued, he continued. When the hill was finally taken, there was no announcement Wojtek could recognize. The noise simply shifted. Firing slowed, men stopped running. Some sat down without speaking. Others stared upward at ruins he had been told mattered more than their lives. Wojtek stood among empty crates, confused by stillness. Later, when officers took stock and reports were written, his contribution entered records cautiously. Not exaggerated, not dismissed. Just noted. A bear assisted in transporting ammunition under fire. That was all. But memory works differently than paperwork. The men began marking their vehicles and equipment with a new image. A bear standing upright, holding an artillery shell. It was not mockery. It was recognition. Wojtek had become part of their shared identity, forged in exhaustion and fear rather than ideology. After the battle, Wojtek returned to his old habits quickly. He wrestled again. He sought food shamelessly. He slept deeply. Yet something had changed. When supply teams formed, he joined automatically. When voices rose in tension, he moved closer. His role had settled into routine. The war did not end with Monte Cassino, neither did loss. Wojtek remained present through it all, unchanged in intention, unchanged in loyalty. He did not know that stories were forming around him, crossing units and borders. He did not know that years later, people would argue about meaning. He only knew who he belonged to. And in a conflict defined by shifting alliances and collapsing certainties, that knowledge carried more weight than orders. When the guns fell silent around Monte Cassino, the Second Corps counted losses, not legends. Victory came slowly, measured in ground taken and names missing. Wojtek remained unaware of outcomes. He reacted only to absence. Fewer men returned to camp. Familiar voices did not call his name. He searched for them without understanding why they were gone. As the campaign moved north through Italy, Wojtek continued traveling with the unit. His presence was now administrative as well as emotional. He was officially enlisted to allow transport by Allied shipping regulations. Paperwork recognized what reality already had. He was part of the Corps. Historically, Wojtek's role did not change strategy or decide campaigns. What had changed was morale, something harder to measure, yet impossible to dismiss. Soldiers remembered the bear when exhaustion threatened discipline. They remembered that if he could carry a shell under fire, they could carry one more step. The emblem of the bear carrying artillery ammunition became permanent. It appeared on trucks, banners, and documents, not as propaganda, but as shared memory. It represented endurance rather than triumph. After the war, the Second Corps could not return home safely. Politics had shifted. Borders moved. Many soldiers were resettled in Britain. Wojtek went with them, transferred eventually to the Edinburgh Zoo. The transition was quiet, but not painless. Former soldiers visited him. When they spoke Polish, Wojtek reacted. He stood upright. He vocalized softly. He reached toward familiar sounds. These reactions were recorded by keepers and visitors, not as myth, but as observation. Wojtek died in 1963. His death passed without ceremony, yet his story did not end. Statues, books, and memorials followed decades later, created not by states, but by individuals who remembered. Historically, Wojtek occupies an unusual space. He is neither symbol nor anomaly. He is evidence that war strips life down to connection. That loyalty does not require understanding ideology. that courage can exist without intent. In the wider record of World War II, Wojtek's significance lies not in what he carried, but in what he reminded people of, that even amid destruction, something untrained, uncommanded, and innocent could choose to stay. And that choice mattered. Years after the war, soldiers who survived rarely spoke of battles first. They spoke of moments, cold nights, shared food, silence after shelling. And sometimes a Bear Wojtek's legacy is not about novelty. It is about companionship under pressure. He did not reduce fear. He absorbed it. He did not inspire heroism. He normalized endurance. In the zoo, he lived differently. Fed regularly, watched by strangers, protected, yet something remained unchanged. When crowds gathered too close, when familiar voices returned, he approached. His responses followed memory rather than environment. This matters because it reminds us that war imprints itself beyond humans. Animals are drawn into conflicts. They do not choose, yet carry consequences all the same. Wojtek did not consent. He adapted. For historians, Wojtek complicates narrative comfort. His story resists simple framing. He cannot be claimed as national achievement. He cannot be weaponized ideologically without distortion. He belongs instead to the people who lived beside him. His memory survives because it feels honest. There is no exaggeration needed. The facts alone are strange enough. In a century defined by mass violence, Wojtek represents something smaller, quieter, and more difficult to categorize. A living being who stayed when leaving would have been easier, who followed without being ordered, who carried weight without knowing why. Perhaps that is why his story endures, not because it is extraordinary, but because it feels human, despite not being human at all. History often records what was destroyed. Wojtek's story records what remained. This is the history of World War II. Whoever oppresses the innocent is an oppressor. Neither the earth belongs to this oppressor, nor does the sky belong to him. We stand, now and forever, with the oppressed. This is WW2 Files. See you in the next one.